Salvation in the History of Africa, which contains strong content that some viewers may find upsetting about slavery of the past and references to enduring racism today.
The transatlantic slave trade from the 16th to the 19th centuries represents one of the most brutal and prolonged periods of human suffering. Men, women, and children sold into a life of degradation and servitude. More than 12 million Africans were transported across the Atlantic Ocean by European powers.
When I was in school, the subject was not discussed. It was in hushed tones because of the pain involved. The culture of black inferiority is entrenched. The words that we use to refer to ourselves and our culture embody this sense of inferiority.
In this episode, we see how slavery became entrenched, the cruel conditions while slaves were held captive, but also how Africans resisted their plight and why many returned to the continent after abolition. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to export slaves from Africa to what was known as the New World, the Americas and the Caribbean, as well as to Europe itself from the early 1500s. At its height, the transatlantic slave trade attracted many European nations. This is well illustrated if you visit Ghana's Atlantic coast in West Africa. There are 32 old slaving forts along here. Enslaved Africans were sent across the Atlantic to work as forced labor in the sugar and cotton plantations of the Caribbean and the Americas, or as domestic servants. I make my way to one of the biggest slave forts, Cape Coast Castle, with local guide Nkunu Akye, a retired university lecturer.
This is just one of the many. At the time, at the height of the slave trade, there were as many as 80 of castles, forts, lodges, and redoubts. Almost all the European powers took part.
This castle, I understand, changed hands 5 times throughout the course of 11 years. Very rapid turnover.
Yes, and it wasn't only this one. The European powers visited their rivalries onto the site. So they were struggling with each other for possession.
And this rivalry was fueled by greed, because trading in slaves was lucrative. This is the kind of grand residence an important European official would have lived in Africa. This house, built more than 400 years ago by the Portuguese in what is today Mozambique, is now a museum. And let me take you inside and just show you some of the furniture and the ornaments, because it really is absolutely stunning, and it gives you an indication of how the Portuguese, at least the elite, lived when they came to Africa. Riches acquired by the few from the suffering of the many. The conditions in which captives were held were horrific, as Nkunu Akie explains when we visit the dungeons at Cape Coast Castle.
The shackling started from the time of the arrest or capture. I'm using those words advisedly. Arrest, capture, seizure, or whatever. There have also been impressions in the literature that people were willing. Now we have records to show that there were really fights against enslavement.
They knew what was happening.
Exactly. And that was one of the reasons, the brutalities of the merchants in handling the slaves.
But even just standing here in Nkunu, the smell that has just suddenly hit me is quite overwhelming in a way. It's not a stench, but it's, you know that there's an air of malevolence that hangs around this place.
I'm happy it's hit you already. Now wait until we get in there. These are channels which were used as the urinals, the unification point.
So it must have been so not at all sanitary.
Not at all.
Because there would just be an open sewer, basically.
Yes. Now you can see up to here. You see this point? All around. What's plaque?
From human waste.
From human waste. And
so
all
they'd
kinds.
actually be sitting in human
right
waste.
in here. Now, the other question for me that sometimes I do not understand, I ask, if you are an entrepreneur, you are making an investment into people which you hope to recoup, if you kept them under conditions such as this, in what state would they be at the time of sale?
I go to another of the much visited forts in Ghana at Elmina. St George's Castle here at Elmina was built by the Portuguese, and it dates back to 1482, which makes it the oldest surviving European structure in sub-Saharan Africa. And when the Portuguese built it, they brought over 600 men, including 100 masons and 100 carpenters, to assist in its construction. Now, it wasn't built with the purpose of holding slaves in transit originally, because Europeans built their forts to protect their spheres of influence. But of course, when the transatlantic slave trade took hold, that's what indeed this very impressive fort was sadly used for. As we stand by one of the slave dungeons, Nkunu points out that there was once a church used by the Europeans immediately above it.
It was converted into a library for children. But you look at the link with the quarters. So they will come and sing praises. I don't know which God.
Nkunu takes me to another part of Elmina Castle to describe how female slaves were sexually abused by their captors. Even young girls were not spared.
This is the female courtyard. Now, the other thing which is so special about this place, soldiers in those days don't go with their wives, girlfriends, or women, but they are men, very active, very strong men, trained to fight, including the administrators and the governors. And each time the governor felt like having an affair, he would come up and stand there, and all the women would be brought out.
For him to take his pick.
And he will make a pick. And when he does so, the selected lady will be washed down, cleaned up nicely, and ushered through these stairs into the chambers of the governor. Now, if the governor publicly is picking, how about the men? How about the merchants? How about the officers? They would all be doing the same.